We had another interviewee who said that if you don't exercise your clout, you don't have it. Is that something you'd agree with?
No, I don't, because I think that they're all different kinds. Really, there's some that give it to you, and there are others that abuse their clout.
Right.
And there are dark clout. There's illegal clout. There's the clout of the mafia. There's the clout of the dirty coppers, and it's not a language art. I mean, I think that there's so many different kinds of it that that's too narrow a view.
The Shackman decrees. Now, that did or did not change the world of hiring, patronage hiring in the city of Chicago?
Well, if you ask the government of the United States through the U.S. District Court, the answer is no. And it didn't. I mean, it just changed things. I mean, I think that it's... I think they got close to reform a couple of years ago, but the history of it is so long. And you figure that it started in '69 when the first suit was filed. And then it was clear that it wasn't going to go away. And so they came to the first consent decree in '72. And that was just for the insiders, that you couldn't squeeze insiders who had already had their jobs governmentally for political reasons, which is clearly still going on. It will go on until a nuclear bomb drops on Chicago. And then after that, then you had the consent decree of '83 when Harold Washington was mayor, and he was like bound by it by name. And this huge, vast list of other elected officials throughout the region that you could not make political activity be required condition for getting a job. And then subsequently you had, Richard M. Daley filing sort of more recently to have the consent decrees vacated because life, circumstances had changed. And the reality then, what immediately fell upon that was the scandals in the Intergovernmental Affairs Office and the indictments, and then the Al Sanchez's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is a point that, in terms of those, and so the answer is no. So you still then a case in the paper this week of an alderman trying to squeeze the Department of Personnel of City Hall to get somebody and a transfer not changed. So that.
To what extent do you think political hiring was one of the main supports for the system that you've described?
I think it's a hugely powerful system. I think there's a mistaken impression, which I think that the Daleys work, which is that they have this monolithic power, that they're a monarchic power. And the reality is that you have a situation that are warlords, in which you've got the Madigan organization, you've got the 11th Ward organization, you've got the O'Connor organization, you've got the Stroger organization. The list goes on of these sort of light cavalries that still do the work. And overwhelmingly, if you look at them or go to one of their affairs, their annual dinners or dinner dances, you'll see that they're mostly overwhelmingly government jobs. They're in the government jobs. So I think that it's very important. But going back to Richard J. Daley, I mean, the first thing that he did was to cut the legs out from under the ward committeemen in terms of they owned certain jobs. And he just took all those jobs directly to himself. And so I think that that's ultimately came in to be the model that his son operates under, which is that the government itself is the pure power, and that the political aspect of that is sort of secondary. But that he, Richard J., took the jobs to himself.
Let's talk about Richard J. Daley in the media. How would you describe relations with the media?
Not good. It has to be understood that during his time, the media of the United States totally changed. You went from the end of the front page era, in which there were 4 daily newspapers. There were senior, long-term, colorful City Hall reporters who were there. And then you ended up in the 60s with the birth and flowering of television and radio news, most particularly television news, which then empowered the civil rights movement and changed the game of how things were covered. So Daley he had very thin skin, and so he didn't like to be asked difficult questions. And so his relationship was testy for the most part. His son plays the media like a piano, but Richard J. Daley was not good. So there's a City Desk, which is I guess the oldest, longest running television show in America. It was an interview show which I used to go down to with my dad when they tape it on.
So on
Channel 5.
Channel 5
right,
NBC.
Right. And Richard J. Daley, shortly after his election, first election, was on there and got the needle, and that was it. He was never coming back. He didn't need that. He didn't want that. So he had a tough relationship with them, and then it was kind of good old boy stuff for quite a while with Richard J. Daley. I mean, they assumed that he was in the beginning. The press assumed that he was just another hack, a Pat Nash kind of hack, and then they discovered that he was formidable and an excellent administrator. And the other thing that I think that they discovered was that they tried to get him. I mean, Royko tried to get him, my dad tried to get him, other investigators tried to get Richard J. Daley, and he knew that. I mean, he knew what kind of environment that he operated in. So there was not one indictment. There was one, but there was not one conviction that stood of any executive appointment of Richard J. Daley in 21 years. And you compare that with the current administration. And that was because he had, but they saw that, and then the racial change took place. It cracked. His golden moment was that he was the kingmaker from Kennedy, right, the Kennedy election, and then he started to decline.
There's always a danger when there's a strong leader that the press will engage in self-censorship. Do you think that occurred here with regard to the late Mayor Daley? Was it difficult for the press to say what they might want to say about him?
It's always difficult. It's difficult to do it in this interview still. I mean, we still operate on Kremlin rules, that you pay for what you say. And the First Amendment is always lost at the individual keyboard, in my opinion. And so that you play your percentages. And there are times when it's just too good a story and you go out and take the heat. Otherwise, you work at the value of having 4 daily newspapers was that if some reporter on your beat did a puff piece, then it would immediately be turned around by the other 3, and they would sort of club you to death with the turnaround that would set things straight. But yeah, you couldn't. If you needled him, your access was closed. The door was closed.
Why don't we talk specifically about your father, Len O'Connor, with regard to the late Mayor Daley. He must have met him many times.
Oh yeah, but he met him a lot. I mean, he had watched him come up. And so one of the things that he wrote about was when he lost his first election for city treasurer or something, and that he was all by himself and sad and kind of weepy, and so they knew each other from all the way through Daley's. My dad was a little younger than him, but he tracked him a lot.
And you said that first city desk interview after Richard J. Daley became mayor was the last.
Yes.
But they must have had many other encounters where your father asked him questions at press conferences, or...
I think some, but I'm not sure how much, really, how much volume there was. I think that my father was very much a multiple source and original sources kind of person. And so he knew Daley or Frank Sullivan or whoever his press secretary was at the time was not going to be telling him anything worth hearing. And so I think that they had some, but it was never, I don't think, very productive conversation. So, but he was a frequent topic of my father's attention.
Of course, he wrote 2 books
Right.
on him, Clout and Requiem. Why did he write those books?
Well, my father had a true love of the city, a true love affair with the city. I mean, he just loved the place. And my own relationship is different. But he loved the place, and I think that there was an element after Royko did Boss that my father never said this. My own view is that Boss is kind of a long magazine piece, and that my father thought that the mechanics of understanding Richard J. Daley was to understand the mechanics of Chicago politics, and so that he wrote Clout with that in mind. And at the time, clout was still a local term, and so it made sense. Now it's a national term, international term. So I think that he laid out how you could rule, how the machine worked. And I think that was the first and still, in my opinion, the only exposition of what the mechanics of politics were in Chicago historically. You'll see a change, really a marked change between the Richard J. Daley of Clout and the Richard J. Daley of Requiem. And that my father really sort of paints a more sympathetic picture of him in Clout. And that he's a decent, sort of honorable man. You get the notion, you see him as the daily communicant and sort of the more balanced, and the needle is more delicate. And in Requiem, it is genuinely a bitter book. And I'm not sure what it was that made the change, but it may have been, the last several years were not good years for Chicago, and he wouldn't give it up.